Welcome everyone. This is Jed Schlackman. For this video I'll be speaking about a couple different topics which happen to, in a sense, overlap in terms of how the debates in public are framed on those topics. These are the subjects of abortion and vaccination. So in the current time period, there is a lot of conflict, a lot of division in society over these topics. And in both of those subject areas, you'll see people using a slogan or a statement that it's my body, my choice. So in the context of vaccination, people stating that are making the argument that it's their personal decision of what they wish to do with their body, what form of medical treatment they want to choose or not choose to receive, and it's not other people's business to tell them what to do. It's their right to have that choice and not have the government or some external agency or employer or someone try to force or impose a particular choice. In the context of abortion, that same phrase or statement is made by those who are arguing that choosing whether or not to have an abortion is the choice of the woman, the person who has the pregnancy, who has that fetus growing in the womb, and it's not something that the government or some external agency should have the power to impose upon the person who's pregnant. So on the surface at least, it sounds kind of like a similar argument, a similar principle in a sense, that we have our body and we should be able to choose what we can or cannot or want to do or don't want to do with our own body, in particular if we're an adult. So many people think that right is in a sense absolute, that it should apply in every situation, every context, and that there isn't any valid justification for making any exception to that right of our personal bodily autonomy. However, other people will point to some other concern or factor that might be present that in some contexts could create a justification for making an exception to that personal right of bodily autonomy. So we'll look at each of these topics, each of those subjects, to see how people have presented a justification to make an exception in regards to that principle of my body, my choice, and how that figures into the public discourse, into the debates or arguments that people are having about these topics, and why it's important to understand both sides in a sense of a debate or disagreement in these contexts, so that if you really do want to have people understand your point of view and have more respect for it or more understanding of it and more openness to appreciate what you're presenting from your perspective, you do need to be able to understand the other side of that debate, how those people are looking at the issue, and how you might be able to communicate more effectively with them or come to some clear understanding, some way that both sides or both people involved in a discussion can gain more clarity about that subject, and one or both people can kind of get a greater perspective or a more complete view of that topic, which might lead to some form of resolution or compromise depending on the situation or circumstance. So we'll look into each of those topics one at a time, and beginning first with a disclaimer that nothing I'm sharing or discussing here is intended as any form of medical advice or medical guidance. I'm not telling people what choice to make. I'm looking more at the logic, the philosophy, and the science that are involved in how people are discussing these particular subjects, and how we can combine all of those, the philosophy, logic, science, etc., not just looking at one aspect of the discussion, but seeing things in a more full or complete way. So first we'll discuss abortion. And abortion's a subject that's been controversial for a very long time, at least in our modern era. And there have been different perspectives and cultural norms, we could say, throughout history in human societies. So abortion in some way has always been around. In the modern era, of course, we have more advanced surgical technology to assist people who choose to have an abortion, but there have been methods to initiate it, to stimulate the body to abort a pregnancy that were there in the past, maybe not as efficient, not as safe or effective per se, but people have been aborting pregnancies for as long as we can document. Now, the debate in the current era seems to be focused on a few different aspects. One, of course, is the right of a woman, a person who's pregnant, to choose whether she's going to abort or not, whether she wants to have the pregnancy come to term and give birth to a baby, or for one reason or another choosing to end that pregnancy, to not have that child. So there's the question of whether that's that person's right to make that choice without any outside interference or coercion, etc. And of course, there has been plenty of influence from external sources. So sometimes there's an external factor that's somehow imposing itself, coercing a woman to not abort or to abort. So there's both of those potentials there. There could be laws that restrict abortion. So there's the threat of prosecution, some type of penalty if a woman attempts to abort. While there's also situations where people who have some type of power over a woman, it could be societal status or financial power, it could be a woman who's an immigrant who could be threatened with being deported. Some of those kinds of situations lead to someone trying to coerce a woman to abort when she might not want to in some situations. So women's right to choose could actually be coerced or pushed in either of those directions, to abort or to not abort. And that's something we can recognize and kind of empathize with the women involved. that from their point of view, they want to be able to make that choice, to not have the government, to not have a husband or boyfriend or an employer or anyone outside of herself force her to choose something that she might not want to choose. So those are some of the issues involved there. There's also the issue of that growing fetus itself, the potential human life there. And the debate, of course, is what constitutes a human life. So is that being, that body that's growing inside the womb, does that constitute a human life with the legal rights that the society, the government, would provide to a human being? So at what point is that considered a human life? And there isn't a consensus or agreement throughout society about that. So that's a significant part of the debate. And of course, if a woman says, this is my body, my choice, she's presupposing in a sense that that's the only right or factor that's relevant in this discussion. She's not considering that there are other people out there who are looking at this situation, and from their point of view, they may recognize that, yes, in general, we have rights about what we want to do with our body, but here you also have another being, this fetus, this embryo, this thing that's growing inside of the woman, that they may perceive as a human being with the rights that a human being is entitled to, such as the right to not be killed. So they're looking at this as kind of conflicting rights that come into play, and they're deciding which one takes precedence. From their point of view, it's the right of the unborn child to not be killed that takes precedence in that situation over the my body, my choice right that women are attempting to assert. So it's helpful to look at this issue by seeing these different vantage points from which people are looking at it, and seeing why, even though you might feel or believe that it is your body, your right, society, the culture around you might be looking at another aspect of that situation, which they might consider creates an exception to the right that you're asserting. So we might think of certain rights as absolute, but other people might see those rights as having some plausible or logical exceptions, which they might choose or decide to assert from the institutions that are present in that society. So that's something we can consider, and to not assume that someone who's not accepting the right you're asserting is attempting to reject your right or trample on your right. They might just be considering from their point of view that there's another concern, another right, someone else who's impacted by your choice, and they want to make that exception there based upon that justification. So it's not that all the people that are against abortion want to reject women's rights to choose what to do with their body. It's that they're looking at this particular issue and seeing that there is another type of right or concern that clashes or comes into conflict with the right for bodily autonomy, since there's another body, in a sense, that's involved in that situation. So to understand where they're coming from, even if you don't agree with someone who's looking at it that way, it's valuable if you want to have any type of dialogue or debate with them to understand their viewpoint, the way they're actually looking at it, so that you can bring into the discussion something that's relevant to their perspective or their concern. So in the case of abortion, it might be spiritual or religious teachings or beliefs that could weigh in on what constitutes a human life or a being with a soul per se. It could be scientific information. So there are people that look at that subject in terms of when is there a heartbeat or some other feature that would suggest this is a viable being, a baby that could exist outside of the mother's womb and live and function. So there's those different elements that are part of the discussion of how society is going to debate to confront these particular subjects or issues. So we've looked at how there can be exceptions considered in the debate about my body, my choice with abortion. And next we're going to look at the topic of vaccination, since in that particular topic you have many people making an argument that they don't want someone else to mandate or impose vaccines upon them because they're saying it's their body and their right to choose what they want to put into their body. So whether that's your perspective or not, let's look at what the arguments or beliefs are that are out there challenging that assertion or perspective, that question whether that's an absolute right that would be asserted in this particular domain versus something where there could be an exception based upon the rights or welfare of other people. So in modern medicine, it's widely taught the following, that vaccinations are generally safe and effective. So they're telling people that there's minimal or no risk of harm to the person receiving that vaccine, that that vaccine will significantly reduce or minimize the chance of contracting a particular illness or having a case of the particular illness that has complications or potential death involved. So there's the claimed benefit there. So the medical physicians and people that are promoting vaccination are claiming there is that benefit and lack of risk. But in addition to that, and direct relevance to this idea of mandates, there's the claim very commonly made and repeated that in order for the vaccines to have their benefit for the community, for the society as a whole, it's necessary for a certain percentage of the population to be covered, to have received that vaccine, to create what they're referring to as herd immunity. So there's a belief, a claim stated there, that in order for this to protect the population as a whole, all these individual people have to have received the vaccine. So this is a claim that would have to be looked at through research, through scientific means. There would have to be some way to really prove that that's definitely true, definitely the case. If you're using that justification to impose or mandate that all these individuals have to receive that vaccine, whether they want to or would choose to or not. So it's the idea here that as individuals, people claim it's my body, my choice, but other people are making the claim that your individual choice has an effect on the health of the community as a whole, that if you don't get your vaccine and enough people don't get their vaccine, then the vaccines won't actually work to promote community immunity. This is something that implies a scientific basis, so it's an exception to the idea of it's your body, your choice, based on the so-called common good. So if you think about the logic of that, if it's really true, if you can definitely prove that in order for the public to be protected, all those individuals would have to have the vaccination whether they want to or not. Assuming that were true, then it makes sense for the community, for the general public, to want to override the individual right to make the choice about what they do to their body, because it's theoretically having an impact on the health and welfare of everyone else. And if we look at other topics that have been a concern for the public, for public health, you can see examples where individual rights are limited in some way in order to prevent the individual from doing something that not only affects themselves but has effects on other people. We could look at the example of cigarette smoking. So as a society, we've created this compromise where we allow adults to choose in their own private or personal space if they want to smoke cigarettes, with the understanding that yes, we've scientifically shown it's harmful for them, and it's harmful to breathe that secondhand as well. So we give the person the choice about whether they want to harm themselves, but they're not allowed to in public, where that smoke is going to impact people who don't want to be exposed to it or harmed by it. So you can't legally smoke in a public place, but you can in your own personal space where primarily it's only impacting you. So as a society, we make these kinds of distinctions when there are other people who are potentially impacted by the individual's choice about what they're doing in regard to their own body. So smoking would be one example, and I'm sure you could think of other examples. It could be prohibitions against using certain types of drugs, where it's perceived that a drug could lead to some type of violent behavior. So someone under the influence of that drug could cause harm to others because of being under the influence of that drug. You're not allowed to drink alcohol to intoxication and drive, for example, because you're putting other people at risk. So it's not just you intoxicating yourself, poisoning your body with alcohol. It's also that in that context, it's likely to have some impact on other people, some innocent victims per se. So bringing this discussion back to the vaccine issue, if you're there saying it's my body, my choice, end of story, no one should be able to make any exception to that you're kind of ignoring the precedent, the justifications that are made for having exceptions to that bodily autonomy assertion. So you can certainly bring that argument into the discussion as part of your reasoning or justification for why you don't want people imposing a mandate for you to receive a vaccine. However, realize where other people are coming from, how they're perceiving the issue, and what beliefs they have about this issue, about what they think the scientific or medical consensus is about vaccines, about their safety, efficacy, and necessity. And if you want to fully debate their position, you'll want to consider looking at those other aspects, at all the science involved. So you might present what you think challenges their claims about those subjects, not only sticking with that idea that my body, my choice, absolute, no exception. Because in reality, society does find exceptions to that type of assertion, situations where your personal bodily autonomy, that right, is not the only factor involved. You're not the only one affected. And a society will naturally, based upon what it believes to be the facts of the situation, seek to protect itself, to not allow an individual to act in a way that is perceived as harmful to the community. So we want to be realistic and reasonable and understand these different perspectives and be thorough in how we discuss the topic, addressing not just one aspect of the issue, but actually all of the relevant aspects. So not only the individual right concern, which might of course appeal to some people if people have strong libertarian or anarchist type political views, then they might lean very heavily toward embracing the my body, my choice concept in a more absolute way. But a lot of other people might not embrace that or accept that so easily. And for that wider audience, you'll look more at the scientific aspects of the subject. And in this particular video, I'm not going into detail into any particulars of what the science actually presents in terms of what viewpoint all the data collectively out there would validate. That's something each of you can pursue on your own beyond this particular video. Here I'm just looking at the concepts, the constructs of how these discussions are framed and why people often get kind of stuck in a slogan or a very limited assertion about it and not seeing the whole picture of how the debate is being approached, particularly how other people are looking at or approaching the debate or discussion of the topic. I hope that this commentary has given you some things to consider, some things to recognize or think about, and especially I'd like for you perhaps to have more understanding or compassion for other people who you might disagree with and how they're attempting to promote what they think is the best possible policy or choice for society. They're not trying to trample on your rights usually. They're trying to assert what they think is better for themselves or better for the community. And it's useful to appreciate that. If you want to have any meaningful or constructive dialogue with them, if you want them to hear out your point of view, your way of looking at it, and perhaps to some extent perhaps sway people to look at things more from your side of it or your way of seeing it. If you want to have that influence or ability to sway people's perspective, it helps to start out with understanding their perspective and not just trying to fight them or impose your way of looking at it, and not seeing any other way of looking at it as having anything valid to contribute to the discussion. For those that are interested in holistic health and related subjects, I invite you to visit my website, which is phinsights.com. That's phinsights.com. For now, I would like to wish everyone a wonderful day. Namaste.